Hi, and welcome to this exclusive edition of The Right Stuff. I'm talking to my guest today, Patrick Craig. He is the author of the book we recently highlighted on The Right Stuff called The Quilt That Knew. It's an Amish mystery suspense, and I know once you pick up your copy, you're going to enjoy that. But I wanted to have a little extra time today with Patrick because we were talking about something that I think is very important. And we were talking about the need for literary Christian fiction. Now, you may be wondering, what in the world is literary Christian fiction? Isn't all fiction, Christian fiction rather, all Amish? And so I'm going to have the Amish writer tell us what literary Christian fiction is and how we can produce more of it. So, Patrick, thanks for being with me on this exclusive content for Right Stuff.
It's nice to be here again, Parker. Always great to chat with you.
One of the things that I find fascinating is that when people look at Christian fiction, they really only see a certain type of Christian fiction that's heavily promoted. And what would you say that Christian fiction is?
Well, it's mostly happily ever after romance. And it's just what you see on Hallmark movies. It's lighthearted. And especially, well, we know that Amish fiction is practically the largest selling genre of Christian fiction and has been for a long time. And most of those books are very happily ever after. It always turns out well in the end. And basically, it turns out well simply because the people are Amish. And that's not real. And a lot of people, especially Amish people that I've talked to, say, no, that's not how it is amongst the Amish. And so my writing partner and I, Murray Pura, have tried to take our writing into a place of literary fiction. And in fact, it's interesting, Parker, because Murray sent me a note today and addressing this. And the note said, the new term that seems to have taken the place of literary fiction is realism.
Okay.
And that's what we're looking for in our writing is realism. And he went on to say, I find it still uphill for us. If we author Amish or romances, all is well among the faithful. But step into the gritty beauty of realism and they duck out of sight. And so that's what we're kind of fighting against. And like he says, it's an uphill battle. And it started back in the 70s when Christian publishers made an executive decision to start, I hate to use the word dumbing down, but start to take the edge off Christian writing, start to take the realism out of Christian writing to make it more palatable. And so what we see in Christian fiction is that the majority of the Christian fiction books are written by women for women. And I'm not putting that down because there's some terrific women writers out there. I wish I could write a book with Bonetta Chapman. She's a good buddy of mine, and I've been after her for about 6 years to write a book with me, and that would be fun. But it's just that, like, for instance, when I wrote my first Amish book, there was war scenes in it, and my editor almost cut them out. And actually, if it hadn't been for Murray running interference for me and telling my editor, if you cut those scenes out, you'll gut this book. And actually, that's why Murray and I have been friends ever since then, because he stood up for me. But there's this, it's very interesting. We're working right now with a fellow who's been a friend of mine for a long, long time. And he's become very interested in the 3 World War II books. And that's about all I'm going to say about that. But one of the things that he did is that he sent me a note today and he said, I was so blown away by the writing in your book that I had to write a song about it. He's a songwriter.
Oh, wow.
And so can I just read you a little bit about what he wrote based
Sure,
on
go
what
ahead.
okay. We all have ghosts. Mine tend to show up in that space between asleep and awake. In the mirrors of the morning, I've seen the sheer delight of a hard-won victory dance on good friends' faces and heard the clash of angry words striking souls, When I was young, I felt the world calling me to unsafe places, singing my name like the siren songs of old. I've ached for families snatched up in the jaws of the beast. I've kissed the dead, and every time it hurts. I see now I have become a part of all I have met, every hard and happy moment since my birth. In a perfect world, I would never have left our little house on Jackson Street, and I might be a TV repairman just like my dad, a family business, him and me. And on a day like this, we'd be down by the crossroads hunting pheasant in a burned out wheat field where the 395 marries I-90 as cars head out of town past the Last Chance Cafe. You'd see kids in the back seats laughing, licking, dripping ice cream. No hurries, no worries, just play in a perfect world on a perfect day. Isn't that gorgeous?
That sounds so beautiful and haunting and very nostalgic and melancholy at the same time. A lot of stuff is going on in those words there. And I don't think he could have gotten that from a regular Christian Amish fiction book. Yeah. What were you going to say?
When he read that to me, I realized, my friend, if you got that out of something I wrote, then I'm doing my job.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the call of someone who wants to write more meatier and realistic fiction, is that they want to invigorate someone's mind to stimulate that thought process that literary fiction gives us. And so the call for Christians to write literary fiction, or as you said, the new term is realism, is one I think Christian authors need to answer. Now, I write sweet and clean, and I write wholesome, and I write inspy stuff. And I know people like those books because they want to know what they're going to get when they pick up a book. They're going to know that I'm going to get a happily ever after. And I even understand why they want that, because the world can be so dark that you want to take yourself out of the darkness for just a little bit. And everything comes out okay. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And there is nothing wrong with that. Escapism is okay. And that's actually what part of what the arts are about. But you and I know that there's a moment when we're reading something or looking at a painting or listening to a piece of music, and there something rings inside of us. And I love it when I'm reading a book and I read something that's so good that I just have to put the book down and just go, wow, I know exactly what they're talking about because they just rang my bell.
And I think too that when you put more realism into your story, you actually reach out to a need that some people want. Some people may be dealing with things that happen, or they really do want their fiction to stimulate them. Not everyone is going to read a nonfiction book. Not everyone is going to pick up some kind of pamphlet or the Bible even and read it. And so we can really get this together, like we can get all running around when we put our ideas in different contexts. And that's what realism can do for us. I'll just start using that term realism. So we'll use that. Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing, as Christian writers, if we write a Christian book, then people who are not Christians most likely will not read that. And so when we start writing realistically, literary fiction or realism, you know what? We're going to be challenged because we're going to be reaching out to the general market, and we're not preaching to the choir anymore. We're reaching for those people who are sitting there in the midst of their troubles with no answer. And we as Christian writers have the answer. We have the answer. And so if we can offer them, the hard cheese of life coupled with redemptive themes, boy, we're going to reach some people, because these times, I look at the world around me and we're in some pretty rugged times, and the world is not a happily ever after place anymore. And even though we want to read that, we've still got to come back to the reality of getting up every day and seeing what's going on around us. And so there's only one life preserver in the midst of this storm, and his name is Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And so we have to offer that. And so we have to learn how to write for people who are dealing with realism and looking for the answer, because we got it. Parker, you and I have the answer.
What's interesting too, Patrick, and I totally agree with you that we do have the answer because the answer is found in Christ. But
Yep.
another thing too about writing realistic Christian fiction or literary fiction, depending on how you want to term it, is that you have an opportunity to really explore concepts. And these
Yep.
concepts are explored in sometimes in ambiguous ways. I was remembering a book I had highlighted on the show some time ago. It was called Everyone Was Left Behind. And this preacher, it was a murder mystery, but this preacher had predicted that Christ was going to come on April 24th, and he didn't come.
Uh-huh.
And so he's like, I thought I had all the numbers right. And he's, looking through everything and all his stuff. And then he looks up and the killer kills him. And so basically the title is Everyone Was Left Behind, but him, because he's dead now. And so I remember throughout that whole book, the main character of the book was not a Christian, was an atheist throughout the whole book. And he's surrounded by Christians. He is understanding what they're saying, but he does not fall for it.
Right.
And that was interesting. And I asked the author later, I said, how come you did that? He said, because a lot of Christians have this idea that Christian fiction should have some sort of come to Jesus moment or a salvation moment, stuff like that. And that doesn't always happen. And I said, that's realistic. And he said, some people were upset that he had an atheist main character in a Christian book. I said, I wasn't at all. I thought it was brilliant, but I have a wider palette for it.
Now, just think about the wisdom of that, because if you have a Christian worldview, and like you said, you're trying to not be cliched, and you're trying not to have these like classical Christian come to Jesus moments where the guy hears the sermon or he hears somebody preaching a message. How do you present something to a reader where it so repels them that they might be looking for that? And you use your villain. You use an atheist because he's going to talk about stuff that the person who is looking for spiritual relief is going to say, well, gee, I don't know if I would like to live like that. Isn't there something else? There's got to be something else besides lying and cheating and stealing and committing adultery and doing all the stuff that this guy's doing. And so you present it to him from the other side and make it unpalatable in their mouth as they're reading about it.
Yeah. And in his book, particularly, he was very much a critic. The character itself was a critic of Christian stuff. And it gives people who are Christians an opportunity to see what people think about Christians. Not everyone is going to fall for where you just have to forgive them. We may forgive people. That doesn't mean they don't have consequences for what they do, but we may forgive people, but that doesn't mean everyone else is going to do that, particularly when you see so many scandals ripping apart churches and you see these types of things letting people go off from the faith. So I get it. So that's why I thought it was a brilliant idea. And actually, when I was thinking about it, Patrick, I reached out to him again. So he's going to be on the show again. So really excited to have him back. It's been a while since he's been on. And the day I reached out to was actually the 24th. I reached out to him and I said, well, I'm mad because I'm still left behind. And since you are too, I said something like that. I said, I want you to come into my show. But so that need for realism and Christian fiction, to be honest, and being a Christian doesn't make it seem as if you're walking this cakewalk. And that's one thing I think sometimes the lighter stuff gives you this impression that life would be well when it's not always the case. Many of us struggle, and you don't have to be a Christian to do that. You know what I'm saying? But we struggle.
Well, here's what I've found out. I have two natures in me. I have this one nature that's my fallen, ruined, Adamic nature that I was born with. And you know what? That nature does not obey any rules for holy living. Not one. It doesn't obey one rule. But there is a nature in me that's perfect. And as Paul said, against this, there is no law. There's no law you need to control the Spirit of God that's been placed inside you with the new birth. So the truth is that we all deal with our Adamic nature every day. It didn't go away when we were born again. We were just given the ability to have another nature that says to us, hey, keep looking up. You're going to deal with that. Paul said it himself in Romans chapter 7. I do the things I don't want to do. I don't do the things I want to do. Who is going to deliver me from this? And we have the answer to that.
And we do. And even
Yeah.
as Christians, I was thinking about something one day, and I think I told you, Patrick, I don't mind repeating it for our listeners. There is a time when, for the first time in my life, I understood why someone would walk away from the faith because of death. And that was my grandmother had passed away. And I remember being so angry at God. It was very unlike me to be upset because I wanted her to stay with me forever. But the thing is, she will say, but I want her to be with me in this mortal coil, if you will, and stay with me here because she wanted to live to be 100. And I was perfectly fine with that. And then a few months after she said that, she passed away. And there was just such a great anger. And then when the Lord released me from that anger, guess who was still there? He was. And it wasn't like I had went away, because I'm like Peter, where else are we going to go? Oh, you have the words of life. And because and that's what I think. And I know our listeners are like, are you guys going to get back to the Christian literary fiction or what? So we're going to get back to the Christian literary fiction, but we can't help but talk about these things because literary fiction gives us an opportunity to really weigh in these knotty problems, not necessarily looking for a happily ever after, even though that can come into play, that can, but it's about realism, about the Christian walk. I know some Christian listeners out there, you're probably thinking, hey, I got a book in mind. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be sweet. It's going to be raw. That's fine. I think we need more of that. I think we do. I think Christians want that too.
Totally agree. I totally agree, Parker. I think that people, if they had the opportunity to start reading books that challenge them, that more Christians and the unsaved would read them too. And that's what we're looking for. I'm looking to reach all kinds of readers. And I want to be the kind of author that people read my book, not because they're Amish, but because I wrote it.
I think too, you just said something about being challenged. And when you're challenged, a lot of people don't want to be challenged nowadays. They just want you to agree and confirm their own bias. But the thing about being challenged, the thing about that is that you start to realize, does your position, whatever that is, can it stand up to scrutiny? There's nothing wrong with that. I can remember when I started to get into apologetics, some years ago, it was because I was challenged by an atheist man. He had, at the time, asked me questions I didn't have answers to. I was much younger than I was in my 20s, and I hadn't really been invigorated by that type of conversation before. And some of the questions he asked, or even some of the arguments he presented, now I'll be more sophisticated in probably responding to them. But when you're 20 years old, you're just kind of taught to, like a nominal faith. I don't want to say nominal. I don't want to say nominal, but you're not really challenged a lot because everyone around you pretty much has the same belief. You're not really pressed about why you believe the way you believe. And so,
wouldn't it be great for you then to take those questions that you didn't have the answers to then and put them in a book, because now you have the answers and you can have the dialogue with yourself, through your characters.
Exactly.
And so now you can ask those questions. And I think that that's what we're talking about here. Realism is asking the hard questions of your readers. This is what's going to happen. How do you feel about that? What is your response to this situation? And that's where we challenge our readers to really get involved with the writing. And I want people to lose themselves in the writing so that all of their faculties are being honed and challenged by the situations and the questions that we're asking.
And I think that's a good place to end our segment today. And I want to thank you, Patrick, for being with me. To our listeners out there, I hope you were invigorated by this conversation. Maybe the Lord is calling you out to write literary Christian fiction. Maybe a barrier has been, I can't write like Parker. Parker writes sweet stuff. Patrick, he doesn't write like I do. He actually writes very hard-hitting stuff, but he packages very well. So he does a great job. But he also has a World War II series that he's doing with his partner, Murray Pura. Go ahead and talk about that real fast.
It's three Mennonite boys who are raised pacifists, but when World War II comes along, each one has their own reason for enlisting in the Marines, and they end up together on Guadalcanal, facing the enemy, and they have to deal with a lot of questions: their faith, their own manhood, whether they can do this. And so the three young men go all the way from boot camp to the occupation of Japan over a 4-year period. And there's some really exciting adventures in there. And at the same time, there's love stories, there's anguish and pain, the pain that the one young man who's a medic feels every time he loses one of his buddies and he can't do anything about it. And yet they make it through this war. But when they come home, they didn't get out clean, Parker. They come home with scars and wounds. And it's a story about the gritty, real side of war and what it does to men and women when they're involved in it. It's called the Island series. The first one is Far on the Ringing Plains, and then The Scepter and the Isle, and the last one is Men Who Strove with Gods by Murray Pura and Patrick Craig.
And the link to that will be down in the show description below this episode. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Patrick, because war is actually a very wonderful, if I could say it that way, backdrop to discussing naughtier things about life. By the time this episode will air, Oppenheimer by Chris Nolan will be in theaters, talking about the gentleman who helped create the atomic bomb.
Yep, Robert Oppenheimer. Yes.
And one thing I was thinking about was he was a brilliant man, incredibly flawed, who created a weapon that destroyed millions of people to stop a war.
Yeah.
And these things are ambiguous.
Yeah.
Okay. They're very ambiguous. There's this massive gray area because one thing they kind of put in the trailer, I don't know too much about World War II, but you may know more about it, more obviously. But one thing they put in the trailer that I found interesting was that they said their enemies were creating a bomb too. And they were actually ahead in research. That's just from the trailer. I don't know.
Yeah. The Germans were working on it. They definitely were going after it. See, the great question that arose when they finally finished that bomb and they knew they could drop it on Japan, they also knew that if they didn't, they would have to send a couple of million American boys to Japan to invade that country. And the death toll would have been in the millions.
Yeah.
So they had to say, well, if we drop this bomb, we'll kill a couple 100,000 people. But if we invade the island, every man, woman, and child will be fighting our troops on the shores of Tokyo Bay, and millions will die. We'll send home 1 million American boys in body bags. So it was a really hard nut that they had to crack when they dealt with that issue.
And here's the thing. People talk about the ambiguity of it because we know it was absolutely very horrible. But then you got to look at the other side of it. Hitler was trying to create an empire. He was trying to get rid of people who were not of the Aryan race. He was following ideology. And get this, there were countries who were in agreement with that. Go figure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So we're giving you ideas, dear listener, about how you can really use literary fiction. And we just gave you one. So dear listener, if you have an idea, you want to kind of talk about some of these things, war, try war, pick any war. So many wars you could choose from. One thing we have is conflict. We have lots of conflict.
Yes, we
gang,
do.
I'm going to tell Patrick, thank you for being with us on this exclusive content on our YouTube channel only. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe today so you can make sure you get all the good stuff when we put up new shows, new content just for you. All right, gang, have a good day. Bye.